Well, once again, we're with you, Gentleman Jim here, the tailor.
And Victoria Baylor, professional dressmaker. Hey guys.
How you doing? How you doing?
So today we're super excited. We have a really cool show planned today. We had originally started to introduce a new segment called 5 Things to Know About Something. And I was going to talk about Career Elastic, but Mr. Jim and I got in a really engaging conversation about experience he encountered recently. So our topic today is going to be dealing with how does one classify themselves as either a beginner, intermediate, or expert sewer. So think about that for a second, because I'm sure you've classified yourself as one of those. How did you derive at that? So Mr. Jim will kind of give us some of his thoughts, and I'll chime in.
What has happened to me on several occasions, and most recent, is somebody emailed me and asked, they teach sewing to whatever group they have, how does one know when one goes from a beginner to an intermediate, and let's even put advanced in that. They were mainly concerned with beginners to intermediate. What determines that?
That's a very good question. Very good question indeed.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to try and break it down. So, no, I'm not going to try. I'm going to break it down to you as best I know.
Well, before you do that, based on what you mentioned to me earlier, and I thought about it, let's debunk some myths about it. Because it seems like people have the wrong misconception about what it takes to classify themselves. So we're going to go ahead and, unfortunately, if you have a little balloon with your own idea, we're going to pop that balloon right now. Sorry. But then we're going to build you up and give you some different insight on how to classify yourself. So one of the myths is that time is not a factor time is a factor in determining whether you achieve one of those levels. But the truth is, time really isn't a factor. Is that right, Mr. Jim?
It really is.
So the difference between someone's been sewing a month versus sewing 20 years, you can't say one is either an expert versus the other. Not technically. So that's one myth that we're going to debunk. And the other thing is you have to have a certain level of experience that is really a factor that hinders whether you can achieve one level or the other. And I know I probably said that backwards. You give me your take on that.
Well, experience. What is experience and how is experience determined? I determine experience not by how many years you've been sewing. People say, "Oh, you've been sewing for 50 years."
No.
That had nothing to do with it, because I'm going to be very, very honest with you. I was blessed to have quote-unquote professional training because I went to school for it. Now, we worked on a certain thing for a certain period of time. That doesn't determine it, because what we worked on, I got because I did what they say do. So, it's not a factor of the time that gave me the experience. I talk all the time, excuse me, about the 3 basic things. Well, no, the one basic thing in sewing. The one basic thing in sewing, and that's being able to sew straight. Your advancement is going to come off of how fast you can master that.
That's right.
That's what
Pretty
it
much,
is.
yeah.
That's what, because I don't care what else you do, still has to be done straight. I talk about zippers and pockets are the key elements. Okay, everything else is a straight line. So the time it takes for you to master that determines where you can go and how you can go.
So it's completely techniques based. And again, we want to reiterate that it is not time based.
No.
We encounter more people that say they've been sewing 20, 30, 40 years, and unfortunately their product is very homemade. And it's no fault of their own for the most part, because they only take the techniques they've been given or they've acquired or they've learned and implemented them. Whereas I've seen personally with Mr. Jim, with a lot of his beginner students that hadn't even touched the sewing machine, in 2 months they're sewing a tailored coat.
Oh, absolutely.
So I mean, you're wondering how do you get from here to here? Well, it's all technique based. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions there. So what are your additional thoughts on that?
Well, I'm just telling you guys that this is all it really is.
Yeah.
Concentrate on that straight line, because everything you do, how you advance yourself, it only comes about because the degree of patterns that you use is the difficult in it. So don't be afraid. A lot of people stop. Oh, I can't do that pattern because it's a, oh, well, I can mention the name because I'm going to mention all of them. It's a Vogue pattern. It's a Butterick pattern. It's a Simplicity pattern. It's a McCall. It's a Berta. They're just different degrees of the way they cut the pieces out. Now listen to what I said. Cut the pieces out.
Yeah.
You still have to put them together.
And it's the techniques involved. And a lot of you have done just that. You've classified your own skill based on the type of patterns you feel comfortable sewing.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of you are stuck in a beginner rut and you've mastered sewing straight. You sew impeccably well. You got to kind of get yourself out of that hole that you have yourself in, whether you decide to tackle, because personally, I'll be honest, a lot of times I don't like tackling garments that have 100 pieces to it. Does that make me less in my expertise? No, that's more of a preference.
That's all it is.
I don't need a million seams in my dress. It just kind of annoys me because I'm more pattern and color based versus seaming based. So think about that. Don't classify yourself based on the type of patterns you can or can't. So classify yourself, again, based on where you stand technically. And again, to not take away from those complex or advanced patterns, because a lot of them do call for techniques that are a little bit above kind of where a beginner would feel comfortable starting. So that would kind of push it over to someone that's probably had a little bit more experience under their belt. But again, that does not diminish your abilities at all.
Don't shortchange yourself.
That's right.
Thinking, because that's what it amounts to. Thinking, I can't do this.
That's right.
The basics just helps the process go better. What I teach is how do we maneuver that? How do we fit those pieces together? Still got to sew them straight. How do I maneuver this side to that side? How do I make the adjustment? That's the technique, not the experience. It doesn't take years to learn that. It takes just learning it. Everything we do is a learning process. Once you get the hang of it, then it makes other things simpler. Now, here's another thing to think about. Once you've mastered the basics, other things fit in place easier. Why? Because you don't have to keep. The time you lose ripping something out and re-sewing it is what frustrates people. Get the basics, and then when you start, you take a pattern. Vogue has more pieces than anybody. So does Butterick, same company. Okay. Then you get to Simplicity started out as a simple pattern company. That's why they called it Simplicity, right?
Yeah.
McCall's came along, they were in the same level. Then Berta came out, and this one came out, and they were all kind of around the same thing. It's only Vogue and Butterick that have the more pieces. Well, guess what happens? If it's a front, and it's one piece, it's simple. You only got this one piece and the side and the back. Vogue cut it this way. Guess what happens? Put them two pieces together, you got the same front again. Then they'll cut it this way. Sometimes they got symmetric designs, asymmetric, whatever you want to call them, and they cut it this way. Well, when you put this piece and this piece together, it still comes out to a front. Garments are broken down into 4 places. Right, left, front, and back. Sometimes the back is one piece, sometimes it's 2 pieces. Well, guess what? Put the 2 pieces together, it's 1 piece again. Same thing with the front. Okay, how many times they cut it, it still becomes. So everything is done simple, left, right, front, and back.
So it sounds like people get really kind of disturbed and distracted by the design elements that they let that intimidate them out of advancing.
I don't care how many pieces it is. It's still going to come down to, like I said, right, left, front, and back. So when you get into putting them together and you look at it, the style of the pattern determines if it's straight, if it's flared, understand? If a sleeve is cut in 1 piece or 2 pieces, if it's cut in 2 pieces, you put the 2 pieces together, it becomes 1 piece, and then you stitch a seam up there. It still has to be done straight. So don't get discouraged by how many pieces it is, just fit the pieces together. That's now where it becomes the technique part. How do we fit them together and get them right? Well, guess what? Sewing straight.
That's right. It's the main fundamental. And one interesting thing, and it's funny because I wish we had filmed our earlier conversation because we were all over the board with this. But one interesting thing that popped up that Mr. Jim and I were just really kind of going back and forth on is that his perspective was there's a beginner and then there's an advance. And like that intermediate level, you just kind of really didn't subscribe to that notion, did you?
No, I didn't.
Tell us why.
I really didn't, because people classify beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Well, they all come down to what you learn in the beginning stage that advances you. Because what happens is you start with a simple piece and a simple pattern. Then you go to a little more difficult piece and a little more difficult pattern. Well, they work hand in hand, because if you get the beginning part down, then this part becomes easier. Now, when you get to what they call intermediate, or advanced, all it's meaning really is the pattern piece is cut more times. To be what? Fit back together to make left front, left back, right back. There's nothing different about it. Now, if you can't sew any of them straight, you can't be really on any level till you get that one there. People have come to me, been sewing for years. I give everybody my little sewing test, because that tells me where I need to start with you. And after all the years they realize I'm just not sewing it in straight. And I look at how many times they take it out and say, that's where your time is lost.
Yeah, they just
Because you're taking it in and out, taking it in and out, taking it in and out. Now,
before we get, you sound like you have a good thought. I'm going to
yes,
piggyback off of your next thought. But it's funny because when we talked about the beginner, intermediate, and expert, I had a slightly different perspective. I do subscribe to the notion of there being an intermediate stage, but I think of it more so from the experience one gets on their belt. And we both agreed it's really, there's something to be said. I like the fact that once you get the fundamentals down, I want us to be more secure in what we know how to do. When you get the fundamentals down, you should be able to feel like you could tackle an advanced pattern, because essentially you're just applying the fundamentals, and you might have to learn how to work with varying factors such as, it might be a chiffon gown. Well, that's a whole nother set of skills you might need to know, and that's something not necessarily a beginner would feel comfortable with, and then an intermediate even might be a little bit shakier. But I think what helps someone transition from a beginner to an advanced is that stage in the middle where you're actively and you're constantly working and practicing and taking on projects and building this knowledge database based on experience. That's why we say if you're going to sew, I know when I started in my blog's 10,000 hours of sewing, I learned really fast because I sewed nonstop. And I was able to advance because I didn't always just stay in the beginner pool. I tackled those projects were a lot harder. Now I tackled and bombed some of them, but you tackle them, you learn, and you keep going, and that's how you actually climb stairs. You got to put one foot in front of the other and elevate yourself. So from that standpoint, I like the intermediate step as being that stage where you're kind of amassing information. But what I found was a problem for me is that I kind of in my brain always kept myself as an intermediate, but I'm hardwired to think that you can always keep learning. So for me, I never see advancement as like a, for me that would be in a ceiling to be like, I'm like in it super advanced, but it's technically not. I am an advanced sewer. I've been sewing for a number of years. I've had a lot of projects under my belt, but it's just, I think I'm an intermediate at heart because I love to keep learning. But to your point, fundamentals is where it's at, and then up from there, your trajectory should be quick, steep, fast. If you find that you can't tackle other projects, it's not really the projects, it's your fundamental knowledge base. Because if you got that, that's right, your skill level, if you can't get that, you can't really climb up. So
at this stage in my career, in my life, I still learn new methods every day.
He's super advanced.
How do I learn those methods? In working on a garment.
That's right.
I figure out me a way. Say,
That's
okay,
right.
Now I've gone to a whole different phase of my whole career lately, even in my teaching method. I'm going back to a phase where I was taught basting. We talked about that, basting. rather than all the pinning, because the time factor that you physically base, to me, is quicker than pinning.
That's right.
It's quicker than pinning. See?
And I'm going to go ahead and make a plug. We were kind of in the works for it, but you're going to have a course coming out on the basting, because there's so many ways you can use it to really speed up your sewing and to sew more effectively. So,
in basting, one thing is accomplished. You can hold the garment in place, because basting is a temporary stitch. So, once again, when you get the fundamentals, because this is a fundamental that I was taught, I got away from it because I could master holding things down with my 10 little pins here. And I got away from it. And I got away from it even in my teaching method, because I talk about it, but I never really and truly, until they see me do it up close, how do I maneuver that? How do I really make these 10 pins work for me? Well, guess what? All I need is a needle and thread, in this other hand, and I base it down, just like that.
And to make a point, and I think you said it so well, or you alluded to it, is that oftentimes the struggle sewers have really isn't their skill level. A major part of that is just handling fabrication and textiles, because every textile has its own personality, and you oftentimes have to shift in your knowledge. The way I handle feeding a Pont de Roma knit is totally different from the way my hands work with a spandex.
Absolutely.
Because the spandex has tremendous stretch versus the other type of knit, which is more of a moderate stretch. But my brain, because of experience, automatically knows what to do. And oftentimes we teach people, but their brains lack that experience. And you per se lack that experience. So I've talked to so many people that have sewn with knits, and they're like, I did it one time, I'll never do it again. But it wasn't you. And you're beyond, more than likely, a beginner. You just struggled with that specific type of that garment.
The technique on sewing all of those fabrics comes down to knowing the nature of the fabric.
Yes.
And if you know the nature of the fabric, you have to know what to do.
Exactly.
I sewed something yesterday. Fabric was a little different from me. I always tell you guys, especially when you're coming down a longer seam, when you get down, don't go all the way down. Hold it together. This is, once again, technique. But this is from the beginning stage. If it starts to look like it's longer on this side, take it out, turn it around. Because the fabric does one thing, the machine does something else.
That's right. And if you don't feel, and that's one way to do it, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can go back to the basting.
Baste it down.
Or you can go ahead and pin it in. But the thing is, you're right, is to always think on the level of what you're working with. So we're saying all this stuff to go back to our main point is, there really is, if you think about beginner, how do you rank yourself? Beginner, intermediate, advanced. I hope some of the stuff we said has kind of made you reevaluate. Again, if you can't get through a garment without it just not looking professional, not looking, and I don't care how long you've sewn, that means fundamentally you're off.
Fundamentals.
But if your fundamentals are in check and you're just a little nervous to dip your toe into something that seems like a more advanced project, again, that does not mean that you're stuck in as a beginner or you're stuck as an intermediate. No. So evaluate yourself based on technique, skill, not on time spent sewing or the number of years done sewing.
That's right.
And the lack of experience you may have. Because lack of experience doesn't mean much.
Yeah. Well, hope that answered some of your questions, because you can never get them all answered.
That's right.
But that's just a perspective on why we think we're a beginner. We never move into an intermediate, and then we're not an advanced sewer. It's not, it comes to your skill of sewing.
That's right.
More so than the time spent.
That's right. Absolutely. So we hope that helped hopefully brighten some of you guys' day. If anything, just made you think of things differently, which is what we're here to do. Yeah. So on that note, we will see you guys next week. We'll be talking about clear elastic, which is a real cool, I love this staple in my notions drawer. But we're going to close out now. So, in the usual fashion, I love to tell you guys, you know it. You know what I'm going to say? God has given you amazing gifts,
That's
whether
right.
it is sewing or anything else. Go out and do some amazing things.
Do some things. Gentleman Jim the Tailor.
Victoria Tailor Dressmaker.
And we will see you at another time.
All right. Bye.